So welcome back to part 2 of our look at the Allied counteroffensive taking place in 1918. So where we left off is that the British and French have made some successful first counteroffensives down here in the Marne, taking back this salient, and also up here in the Somme area with the Battle of Amiens. Now, the thing to understand here is, again, this series of offences is taking place, just like we saw with the German spring offensive. It's not necessarily important for you to remember every single little element of what is happening. It is important, however, to get a sense of these series of offences that are taking place on different parts of the line. They are very well coordinated, and moving troops up and down is something that the Allies are now able to undertake. So really for you, it's a matter of understanding this series of offensives and their effectiveness at pushing the Germans back. So what I want to do is show you some of these so you get a sense of this moving along the line at different points in time. So on the 10th of August, for example, we finished, 8th to about the 11th up here, we had the Battle of Amiens. But now down here on the 10th of August, we've got the French taking up in this area, moving forward. So back along this Somme Valley, taking back Montdidier. And on the 20th of August, as an example, they move here to Noyon and they take 8,000 German prisoners on that day. The British also continue up in northern France, up here, pushing a little bit further, building on their original gains that they made in the Battle of Amiens. And in fact, on the 2nd of September, we move forward so far that we actually break through the Hindenburg line. Remember that deep defensive line that had been built by the Germans that they dropped back to in 1917. Also, we've got the Americans coming in. The Americans have joined the attack down here in this part of the line. And we can see here in the middle of September that the Americans are really pushing back this line down here. Lots of different breaks. Let me show you some more American infiltration here in the Argonne Forest. Is happening on the 26th of September. Back up here, the British at Arras are making inroads on the 27th of September. The next day, the 28th of September, we've got a force of British, French and Belgian forces up in the Flanders area, really pushing back and away from the town of Ypres. The 29th of September, back down into the Somme area, and again advancing across this Somme Valley. And so what we've got pushing this dotted line here is where the Allies have got back to by the 3rd of October. Really pushed the Germans back. And it's at this point that Ludendorff really understands, this is our friend Ludendorff from Germany, he understands that the war has been lost. And one of the things he initially starts thinking of after the Battle of Amiens is, do we return to an attrition approach, just dig in and really try to wear the Allies down so that we could get them to come to the peace table? But what we've got to understand, all of this fighting costs a lot of lives, Allies and German lives. So, for example, the Germans had suffered 1 million casualties during their spring offensive. And in response, the British now suffer 350,000 casualties in 96 days. The British at this point are losing more casualties per day than they had across the time of the Battle of the Somme or the Battle of Passchendaele. So this fighting in 1918 is intense. Okay, yeah, we're trying to save lives, we've got better techniques, but there is very intense fighting going on. One of the things that had really been successful for the Allies was their use of the tanks, which had had a significant impact on the morale of the Germans. From the 28th of September, as we smash through the Hindenburg line down here around Cambrai, Ludendorff himself over here, he actually suffers a seizure and collapses. He doesn't die, but this is the intense pressure that is on him now, his understanding of what is happening around him. The following day, the 29th of September, the German military authorities, now, Ludendorff's back on his feet, they understand how dire this situation is. Because if this continues, the German army is going to be pushed backwards, backwards, backwards. They really don't want to be pushed back into Germany and starting to negotiate peace at that point. And so Ludendorff himself went back to Berlin, to the Reichstag, the parliament, and on the 2nd of October he spoke to them, explaining the situation, explaining how difficult the circumstances were, and asking them to now start pushing seriously for peace. On the 3rd of October, the German government officially sent a request for an armistice. The interesting thing is they didn't send it to the British and the French. They sent it to President Woodrow Wilson, the United States President. In another video, when we look at the armistice, we'll talk more about exactly why that was the case. While that happens on the 3rd of October, the Germans actually, request a peace negotiation. The fighting continues. The fighting doesn't stop. And so during October, we see continued pressure from the Allies, pushing, continuing to push. We see large numbers of German desertions. We see them surrender in large numbers, but they don't just give up. The fighting continues to be fierce, and the Allies continue to lose large numbers in these months of fighting. What we've got to understand, however, is the German line doesn't just break down, break apart. It's being pushed back continuously, but we don't say that it ruptures. It doesn't break open. And so it's more an erosion of the German position. But in this last month of fighting, significant gains are made. You can see in this picture here, this is where they are. The Allies are on the 26th of September, and they are pushing all the way back until our armistice is signed on the 11th of November. You can see massive great gains being made all the way back to the town of Mons, up here in Belgium. And in fact, this is the line that they get to by the 11th of November. Look at these massive gains that have been made, just pushing back the Germans consistently. But there's a lot of fighting that goes on in that time. We've got to understand that the fighting in 1918 is fierce, and huge numbers of casualties are suffered during these months of fighting. Now, you might be thinking, we're going to take a look at the armistice itself and the negotiations in another video, but you might be thinking, well, hang on, where are the Germans' allies? They're falling apart, but why don't they get their friends to come in and help them? So here we see a map of Europe overall, and the central powers. We've really focused on Germany here on the Western Front, but of course we've got Austria-Hungary here as well, massive country. We've got Bulgaria and the Ottoman Empire, of course. So what's been happening to them? Well, they're actually in a worse position than Germany is. You might think because the Russians have withdrawn, the Austria-Hungary is doing it all right, but they've been fighting down here against the Romanians, still fighting against the Serbians, and also over here against the Italians as well. So what's going on? Well, Bulgaria here was in such a difficult situation that by the 28th of September in 1918, they'd been invaded and they asked for peace. So by the end of September, Bulgaria's out. Turkey, the Ottoman Empire, really suffered badly. They'd been pushed back, mainly in the Middle East here. We'd seen the British really push them up in this direction. And on the 30th of October 1918, the Ottoman Empire surrendered. Said that that's it, we're not fighting anymore. The Austro-Hungarian Empire itself, well, it had really fallen apart from the inside. You might remember discussions we've had about all those different nationalities internally within the Austro-Hungarian Empire had been held together for quite some time, and going to war had held them together, but now it just collapses and breaks apart. The Czechoslovaks up here and the Yugoslavs down here had basically just declared themselves independent in October, pulled out of the war. Austria here had actually sought a separate peace. They didn't want to be part of the empire anymore, and so looked for their own armistice by the 30th of October. So that's the allies of the Germans gone. Germany, if they can't stand on their own 2 feet, are really out of it. And Germany understood that. That's why as we move into October, they are seeking an armistice. And as I said, we get it by the 11th of November. But we'll take a look at that process in more detail in another video. So that's it. That's the military operations that are happening, leading us up to the end of the war. A reminder that the fighting in 1918 is fierce, it is intense. We have huge numbers of casualties. Halfway through the year, by May, it looks like the Germans are going to win, but then they peter off. It doesn't work for them anymore, and we've discussed why. Then we see the Allied counteroffensive and all those elements which go towards making that counteroffensive so successful and pushing the Germans into such a dire situation that they have to ask for peace before they end up back on their home soil. So that's it for this looking at the counteroffensive. The next video is going to be looking in more detail around those armistice negotiations.